What is a system? Well, a system is a full set of interacting components. It's looking at the whole as a complexity. It's not looking at a slice of it or a piece of it. It's looking at all the various components in a holistic world view. So it's looking at people. It's looking at the way we do things, the process by which we do it, the interactions between people, the equipment we use, the tools, the machines that we're using, the environment, the building, the culture that we're in, the nature of the relationships of the people who are involved, and even those who are tangential to that in terms of like family structure and so on, how all that come into play and their background and their traditions, and even the measurements, the way we measure our success, or we measure failure, or we measure things that are technical in nature, the way that we make decisions, the way that we solve problems, the way that we view the world in terms of our own optimism or pessimism. All these things come into play, and most of them are going to be intangible. They're going to be things that we can't actually put our finger on, we can't touch, and they're the ones that are the most important. So that's really what a system is, and the reason I think it's gotten such popularity is that it's natural. It is the way the world works. It's not something where we're trying to do what they did for centuries, and that is to break things down into pieces that we can understand, where we take something completely out of context, we divide it into tiny understandable pieces, we reassemble it thinking that it's going to behave as a whole, but it fails miserably because that's simply not the way the world operates. That's not the way nature is. So the goal of the systems theory is to keep zooming out, looking at a bigger and bigger view of the system until you understand cause and effect, so that you can make sense of what's happening versus what's going on within the dynamics of that system. And you need to zoom out quite far, much more than we may think. And if need be, you zoom all the way out into a world view. You need to look at the entire world as a ecosystem. And I think that that's what gives it such credibility, is that that's ultimately where all these systems need to be attracted back to, is the very ecosystem that we're living in, which is this zero-sum game where everything has to be accounted for, everything is conserved, and explains all that there is, and is actually a very spiritual and holistic way of looking at life. What is systems thinking? It's just a couple slides here. It's a conceptual framework and a common language. It's really a body of knowledge. It's coming from many different disciplines. It's coming from psychology, philosophy, certainly the harder sciences. It's a variety of things, and it's a set of very specific tools that can be taught and used that also evolve as we understand things more and more over the years. And it's really to help us understand and work within a complex system. And the problem that we're having right now at the church is a wicked problem, and a wicked problem will invariably get worse if we apply linear thinking to it. In other words, we use this decomposition, and then one thing leads to another, and then only use nouns, people, and things to understand. Those combined really spell for a wicked problem that just runs amok, because at that point it can't be solved because the problem never existed in those spaces. So it's very important that you at least understand enough of systems theory to get beyond our limitation of viewing the world as things and objects, which I think is an interesting and also perplexing concept, because of all organizations to understand that there's more than what the eye can see should be a church. And that's really what this is about. It's really saying that we have to look beyond those things that we can see and touch and feel and point to in order to really understand how the world works. And once we understand how it works, whether we agree or disagree, it doesn't matter, we have to be humble, then we can understand cause and effect, and then we can see how our own actions play into this and what we can actually do to change something, or at least have a chance of honestly being able to succeed, because we understand what's going on, and then when the results are different than what we predict, we'll be able to better understand that as well and improve our world view. So it's a process. It's not something, it's not a methodology, it's not a thing or a tool. It is an approach that is scientific in the sense that it is only as good as it is last proven to be good. So it's going to be constantly challenged in of itself, and that's, I think, why between the humble self-improving nature of it and the fact that it's looking towards the natural law and order of the way the world works, I think those two factors give it great credibility to me. So there's several things to go through. You kind of view it as an iceberg that's kind of got cut off down here, but what we're really looking for above the waterline would be the events, just what it is that happened. But what's below the waterline is where we are really mostly concerned, and that's where we look at patterns, trends of changes over time that we're looking for, not just the individual events, the circumstances, and then the structure of what's going on, and it'd be the causality in terms of what feeds what and how they interplay with one another. That's what's all below the waterline, and that's what part systems theory is about. Okay, this sheet here, probably can't see all of it, but it has a variety of things on here that just kind of describe how a systems thinker operates, what their habits are. They seek to understand the big picture, observe how elements within systems change over time, generating patterns and trends, recognizes that a system's structure generates its behavior, changes perspectives to increase understanding. In other words, you walk to the other side of the problem and look at it. You look from a top down. You flip-flop. You take your assumptions and you reverse them. Things of that nature. And that, I think, can confuse people, because sometimes that looks like you're wishy-washy or you're on this roller coaster of opinion, but really what you're doing is you're just looking at the problem from different perspectives, different ways, intentionally, just to get a different viewpoint of what could be going on. Identifies the circular nature of complex cause and effect relationships. And this has worked against us a great deal because it is circular, but that's the way the world works. You do not have cause and effect. A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D. That's not the way it works in the world. These are loops. These are things that go around and around and interact with one another, and we'll go into that here in a little bit. Surfaces and tests assumptions. In other words, when you hear something, you're willing to stop the conversation and test to see if that really is true before building off of it. If you hear something like 25% of people say X, I would not be willing to build a conversation off of that. I want to know, well, where's that coming from? Why is that germane? And are those numbers real? If not, then why are we using them, or what purpose are they serving? Because quite often there's other things going on. So I think we have to always test our assumptions going into a problem-solving session. Considers an issue fully and resists the urge to come to a quick conclusion. Considers how mental models affect current reality and the future. In other words, our mindset can control and can affect the reality more than we think. We are not just an innocent observer. By observing, we are interacting with the system. So we become part of the system by the very nature that we are observing it. And that's something that has been proven for years in physics. But it is a reality. We are not examining a system in a conference room as if it existed without us. We are part of it. The mere observation alters the system. Uses understanding of system structure to identify possible leverage actions. So we're always looking for, as systems people, leverage points, something that a small action will yield a very large outcome. Considers both short and long-term consequences of actions. Checks results and changes actions if needed. Does approximations. In other words, you get closer and closer to your goal, so you don't try to slam dunk it from the get-go. Recognizes the impact of time delays when exploring cause and effect relationships, and we'll talk about that in a second. And finds where unintended consequences emerge. So this last one is interesting because that's really what we're looking at right now. This unintended emergence, which is a bullying type behavior, a manifestation of the blame and shame culture. Root cause analysis later on, you're going to see that we only look at things that have evidence behind them, and then you name the evidence. So you don't have to say that popular wisdom has it that this exists, when you can simply say that this is what happened, or this is what so-and-so discovered and found, and here's how they measured it. Those kinds of things are tangible and always come back to the word cause. here's the general systems thinking approach. A 6-step process. One is to define the problem, and that is not something to be trivialized. I think defining the problem is about half of the effort in itself. It has to be done in a very specific way, and most people do not define their problem, and they jump right off into solutions, not realizing that not only is the problem not defined, but there are different definitions of the problem in the room, and then they jump right into solutions and then wonder why they have problems. 2 is list factors, looking at important drivers and so on. Draw a reference model of the way things are behaving today, and we'll talk about those archetypes here in a second. And then build a systems map. Why am I even doing this? Okay, skip this. Skip that. Okay, now this one, the next concept is going to be just very briefly touched on, but you'll hear me talk about archetypes, and that is a number of outcomes that are so predictable in the real world that we have essentially identified these as canned systems that emerge out of other systems, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. And they are tragedy of the commons, drifting goals, escalation, fixes that fail, and this is the one that works a great deal at our church, where the solution that you're applying is designed to fail. Growth and underinvestment, I think that also takes place at the church. And limits to success, shifting the burden and success to the successful. Again, there's a lot to be talked about all these, but these are very common things in the economy, in business, in social science, all throughout the world. These are constructs that are predictable and emerge as you're doing a systems analysis. And you'll see these at play, and it really helps a great deal, I think, in terms of just being able to identify it and then move on to keep with the analysis and see something that emerges, like I say, that has a pattern that has been identified time and time again. All right. There are also intervention points, and this one is going to pick up. Then there are intervention points, and this one's going to be a little bit tricky to understand in a short few minutes, but it's critical to see why certain things don't make sense in terms of solutions for the church. And these are called leverage points or points of intervention in a system. And you start at the bottom, and that one is going to be numbers. So this would be a way of viewing the world, being able to deal with problems. So it would be like financial statements. If you're talking about maybe membership, it would be how many members we have, how many members quit. It's a way of dealing with the world by dealing with it from a number standpoint. It's both a mindset and it's also an intervention point. So if we have a problem with membership, we can focus on the numbers. The next up is stocks and flows. And that's real systems thinking terminology. Stocks and flows simply means that information flows and then it accumulates. So it can be something as like information, it can be something like inventory, it can be something like knowledge. So you have information or knowledge flowing, and then it stocks in different places, which then goes up and down. So that one's a little bit elusive, but will become clearer later on. You have negative feedback loops. And this would be, for example, the something that balances a positive feedback loop. So that would be, okay, this isn't going to work. Okay, we have negative feedback loops. Above that is positive feedback loops. And then information flows. So let's take a look at this so far, because we're looking at order of intensity. So if you want to come in and change, for example, your membership, you want to have more members, The least effective would be to operate and to intervene at the numbers level. So just look at the numbers of members and then try to deal with improving the problem just by looking at the numbers. You'll probably have minimal at best impact because numbers tend to be backward looking and have little effect on forward thinking. So if you want to increase your income or increase your members by seeing how many members you have over time, historical, that doesn't really lend itself to a solution that's going to get you more other than just tracking the fact that you do or don't have more. But that's almost always where business focuses, is at the numbers level, when really it doesn't make a whole lot of sense in terms of being able to change something. Let's jump up here to these feedback loops. The lesser of the two feedback loops would be the negative ones, so you would look at things that are balancing or counterbalancing a behavior loop. So in this case, perhaps why people don't come back to church. By looking at that, you would have something that is more effective than the numbers, but it would be even more effective to look at the positive feedback loops, and that would be look at why people do come back to church, and then focus on that, of improving that, make these loops stronger. Okay, and it's certainly possible to intervene at multiple levels, but it's really the highest level that you can achieve that is also congruent with the way the organization is operating. Next up would be information flows, the way information flows throughout the organization. That becomes a little elusive, a little abstract, but it's really critical in terms of decision making and assumptions and things of that nature. Next up is rules. That would be both written and unwritten, but just rules about how you do things, like organizational procedures, organizational operating rules. Then comes self-empowerment, which is essentially the ability for people to organize themselves, to have a bottom-up initiative, so that you have a way to spawn new ministries, for example, that they wouldn't necessarily have to be the brainchild of leadership and come down, but it would be something that emerges from the masses and then gets encouraged and then builds up. So that is a mindset, that is a cultural kind of thing that operates and is a very, very powerful way of operating an organization and to intervene. So for example, you're going to see later on that coming in and trying to change a wicked problem at the church and a cycle of abuse is not going to work by measuring how many people we have or how many dollars are coming in or not coming in the door. It's not going to work by saying, here's how much money is in the checking account, or here's how many members we currently have, because that would be the stocks part of these numbers. It's going to be better by asking people why they didn't come back or are coming back. That's a step in the right direction. But the way you're actually going to overcome this is up in this area by having somebody who's not leaders, who's not a big mover or shaker, but it's going to be the ordinary people, kind of the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington type of people who are going to band together and retake their organization, essentially. That's the self-empowerment, the groundswell, the bottom-up way of clearly intervening and changing a system that's very, very powerful. Above that is organizational goals, and if this is assuming that the goals are actually built on all of this, so we have the proper loops and so on to make sure the organizational goals actually become true, and we get closer and closer to them through self-empowerment, and we have congruent rules, we have information that supports that, and we have things that get us closer to the goal. Our positive feedback loops, things that get us further away from the goal, are de-emphasized by negative feedback loops, and then the numbers and so on reflect that. So I think a great example of this would be if our goal is to help people and to be outside the building, then that should be the first number on our financial statements. And if everything else is infrastructure and supporting of that, then there should be a distinction on the statements to show that that is literally below a line or on a second page or something to show that type of priority. But I believe we have our own self interest in mind in terms of the building, maintenance, care and feeding of infrastructure, those kinds of things are up front, and then comes the intangible stuff that supports the organizational goals. And I can see why that would be, because we are focused on the nouns, the things, and the people, again, that we understand. The intangible stuff we don't know quite what to do with, so that ends up down at the bottom. But that's part of the problem, because the numbers have to be in support of all of this. Otherwise, this is just it's just going to tip over, because the foundation is not there. If we don't have the feedback loops organized in a fashion to actually do the corrective feedback and reinforcement and information, all these things are not working, then we can talk forever about having different organizational goals, but it's meaningless if these things are not supporting that. And I think that's one of the things that goes on, is that we change our goals, but this stuff is still old school, is still not in support of this intervention up here in this operating level, so it doesn't work. Next up here is the mindset of the people, and another way of viewing that would be the culture. And certainly that is where we are operating from a dysfunction standpoint. We are saying that our culture of blame and shame and our culture of command and control is dominating everything else, so that means everything below here is in support of those cultures, and they sure are. We have feedback loops that encourage that behavior. We have negative feedback loops that are non-existent. They have been squelched and turned into positive feedback loops indirectly. The self-empowerment is virtually non-existent. The rules are all inclined to support the culture and that mindset. Information flow is very filtered and purpose-driven to support this. And the stocks and flows, if you look at the balance sheet of how much money we have spent on things to support our own infrastructure and the status quo, it's overwhelming evidence that that's what's going on here. And the flow of information, the flow of money, the flow of volunteer labor, and so on, the flow of time spent discussing items in board meetings, all those kinds of things are, again, in support of this culture of blame and shame and self-centered focus and top-down command and control type cultural bias. And then lastly, like I say, the numbers certainly support that as well, just in terms of the literal numbers, but also the way they're presented, although I think that's gotten better, but I think the way they're presented still reflects this culture. So this can be good or bad. In this case, yes, we're operating at this level, but is that what we want? Do we want a culture of command and control and blame and shame, or do we want a culture of that people outside the building that we're helping come first, and then the other things come if there's resources left? I think that would be the culture that would need to be changed. But trying to go from the existing culture to this more outwardly focused culture by doing something down here is not realistic. You're not going to come in here and say, well, I'm just going to publish different numbers or ask for more contributions up here, ask for a greater flow of income, because that's going to then yield itself to us having a better outreach. That's just not going to work. We can use positive feedback loops and say that we're going to spin control and pump everybody up, that's what we're going to do, but not have any negative feedback loops to correct behavior going the other way. That's not going to yield any kind of result up here other than reinforcing the existing culture. So we think we're intervening, but when we're operating at this level, we need to intervene at this level. If we're operating somewhere down here, then the intervention has a fighting chance down there, but the intervention is always better the higher it is. Certainly if you can intervene at this highest level, then the other things fall in lockstep below it. But it also means that that's the way it is today, because that's the way this plays out. The highest level, and that's the one that, of course, as a systems person, I always strive for, and doesn't seem to really be very practical, but it is the paradigm viewpoint, and that would be being able to step out of your own skin, be able to step outside of this systemic view, however big that view is, to be able to describe your culture and all of this, and now be able to step outside of that and to get a whole new perspective. That's like when someone goes on a trip to see some kind of goes to blah, blah, blah. That's like having somebody have a life-changing event or something where they view the world in a different way and they completely change everything about themselves. That's the most powerful and is the one that can actually transcend everything below here the easiest, because one is that it subordinates everything, but two, the paradigm is really in our mind. It's not something that requires tangible things like down in this area, very tangible. Up here are more intangible, but this is completely our viewpoint. It's a level above our current mindset, but it's a new way of viewing the world, a new mindset. And it can be almost insurmountable, or it can be extremely easy, but probably nothing in between in terms of being able to achieve that. But that would be the highest level of intervention and certainly the highest level of functioning. Okay, another way to look at systems thinking is kind of this evolutionary approach to the way we understand the world, and kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the 5 levels of survival and physical needs, emotional needs, and self-actualization, that kind of thing. Same thing going here, where we have at the lowest level just survival and safety. Then we work up to family bonding, ego, self-expression, power, then order, hierarchy, purpose, rules, discipline. That kind of sound familiar? Then rational, scientific advancement, kind of understanding things from that perspective. Then we move up to compassion, sensitivity, and diversity. And then comes systems thinking, and that's the interconnection of things, the interdependency of things, and the ecology or the ecosystem of the way things operate in context of its ecosystem. Blah, blah, blah. And then we have systems thinking, which is about the interconnection and interdependency of events and other factors, and it's really the ecology of the ecosystem. And then above that is kind of a global thinking, this synthesis and this energetic integration, which would be kind of the ethereal thing about energy, and would be the kind of the somewhat new age idea that everything is about energy and frequency, and the string theory, things of that nature, where the interconnectedness is a literal physical manifestation of intertwining or interacting energies among ourselves. Okay, the way systems people look at things, again, is not in a linear fashion where A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, and then D is the cause, which would be like a broken part or a person not doing something. It would not be that, and it certainly would not be this simple linear causation. That's not really the way things work. The way the world works, from our understanding today, is loops. So you have these causality loops where these things are around the circle, and then it loops around itself. So you may have something that, let's say you want to turn the water on in the bathtub, and you want it to be just the right temperature. So you turn the knob to the right to get warmer and warmer water. That would be a causal loop that says as you turn the knob to the right, the water gets warmer. You turn it to the right some more, it gets warmer. So it just keeps going this way. It'll just get warmer and warmer and warmer. And so that would be a reinforcing loop. And then you have balancing loops, which go the opposite direction. So if the water gets too warm, you turn it the other direction, and it gets cooler and cooler. So that would be a balancing loop. The two of them put together is really how that system works. And so you're not just turning a knob. What you're really doing is you're measuring the outcome, which would be having your hand under the flowing water, and then you're sensing the temperature, and then you're going to either go this way or this way, have the reinforcing loop or the balancing loop take place by turning the knob one way or the other till the temperature is correct. And that's really the way systems thinkers do cause and effect, is by drawing these two types of loops. Now the thing that comes into play is, as you know, if you turn it to the right too far and you get hot water, and then you overreact by turning it to the left, and it's going to feel a little bit warmer, and then all of a sudden it's going to get ice cold because there is what? A delay involved. So you're typically going to have a delay between some of these steps, and that is a very, very significant part of this, because nothing in the world has cause and effect lined up precisely. They are always separated by time and space. So time, space, and actually circumstances as well, because over time and space, circumstances change. So the three things that play into these loops interacting with each other are the delays, the circumstances, and the actual so the things that play in here is the delay is very important, because that changes the circumstances and makes it not necessarily as intuitive as you would think, because of the interaction of this delay in what you're feeling versus what you're doing. And that's what typically really throws people off, because they don't take into account the change of circumstances and the change in delay. So this is what it ends up looking like. You get all these loops interacting with one another, and it looks complicated, but really you have things that start emerging or start lifting off the page with the bigger fonts here that are dominantly controlling the particular subsystem in play there, and then as the thing is built up, you get the overall system to understand what factors have evidence that are actually contributing and actually controlling and have the chance of being changed to affect the outcome that you're expecting.